Starting us off at number 10 is Isla de las Muñecas, I hope I said that right, or also known as the Island of the Dolls. Now this island is just south of Mexico City and has quite the story. Don Julian Santana Barrera was the caretaker of this island, and one day he found a little girl drowned by the water. He had no idea how she had died and he was unable to save her, and a few hours later he saw a doll floating near the canal which he assumed was most likely that girl's. Out of respect for the girl, he took the doll and hung it on one of the trees on the island, and that's how it all began. After that point, it's said that Julian started getting haunted by this girl, and in an attempt to appease his spirit, he started hanging more dolls all around the island. Those close to Julian said he changed after that period. It's like an unseen force started driving him to make these dolls his life. After 50 years of collecting dolls and hanging them, Julian was found drowned in the exact same place he had found that girl's body. Many believe Julian made up the story in his solitude, but I feel like 50 years of sticking to a fake story is a bit much. And despite thousands of people living on the island currently, most of them believe the spirit of the girl, Julian, and the dolls heavily haunt and protect the island. Many have seen the dolls move and have heard whispers coming from them, so I mean, I've given you the information, the rest is up to you whether you want to move there or not. I've done my bit. Coming in at number 9 is Star Island. Located in the city of Miami Beach, Star Island is actually a man-made island that was completed in 1922. You can access the island quite easily by land or by barrier islands, and it's had a lot of famous residents over the years like Shaq, Emilio and Gloria Estefan, P. Diddy, etc. But despite the celeb appeal, it's actually been the site of a lot of horror. The Oceanic Hotel was built on the island in 1873 but burned down 2 years later. When the owners rebuilt it, there were many reports of the 4th floor of the new hotel being haunted, with guests saying they could hear furniture being dragged around in empty rooms and doors opening and closing when no one was there. They would also hear scratches at their window and voices along with those scratches. People speculated it was the guests that had died in the previous hotel that were haunting the new one. Now for horror number 2. 20 years prior, Reverend George Beebe moved there to preach on the island. The fresh sea air also made it a very popular area for tuberculosis patients to come visit, and the Reverend held a lot of sermons for them, not knowing 5 years later all 3 of his daughters would get the illness and die. The girls were buried in the cemetery he made, and he left the island soon after that, and I really can't blame the man. But many tourists have seen the girls running in the cemetery and heard them giggling as they've been close to their graves. Others have even heard the whispering of small children reciting Bible verses. Wow, they really are holier than thou. Last but not least, if ghosts were bad enough, people believe that vampires also inhabit the island. Since it used to be a TB camp way back when, historically New England vampires were born after dying from TB, so there's that link there as well. Could this be the new set of Twilight? I don't really know. At number 8 we have Hart Island, also known as the Island of the Dead. Off to a great start here clearly. Located in New York, and honestly this island has been through it. It used to be the location of a psychiatric institution, a prison war camp, a boys' reformatory school, a tuberculosis sanatorium, a rehab center, a jail, and a potter's field. Was there anything happy on that list? I really don't think so. More than 1 million people are buried on the island, many of which weren't claimed by their families or were homeless. Access to the island is restricted unless you're a family member of someone buried there, and even then you need to request access beforehand. From the name you can probably guess that many people believe the island is haunted, and with that many people buried there, it'd be impossible if it wasn't. No one has the option to live there, but I don't think anyone would even if they did. Filling our number 7 slot is Alcatraz Island, and Lord knows this one had to be on the list. If there's one island that has a notoriously bad reputation that everyone knows, it's Alcatraz. Located in San Francisco Bay, the island is home to the oldest operating lighthouse on the west coast and a very well known abandoned prison. Now before the prison, the island was inhabited by Native Americans for thousands of years, and even they kept tribal members there who broke the rules. By 1934 it was turned into a maximum security prison, and during the 29 years the prison was in use, the penitentiary claimed no prisoner ever escaped successfully. 36 tried, 23 were caught, 2 2 drowned, 6 were shot while trying to escape, and 5 were never found and presumed dead. Al Capone was in there, George Machine Gun Kelly, Alvin Creepypasta. So many notorious criminals were held in Alcatraz. The island is oozing history. The guards were very well trained to guard the men, but they had no clue about rehabilitation. They used to torture the inmates verbally and physically, and inmates would do it to each other as well. Now, a lot of horrible things happened on this island, and there are specific rooms and cells where a variety of ghostly sightings and activities have been reported by visitors, rangers, and even prisoners. Whispering has been heard in the cells, you can see phantom figures looming in the corridors, cell doors locking and unlocking, cold spots in random parts of the prison, and even the sound of musical instruments being played. Apparently, every single guard and official who served there experienced something out of the ordinary. Now at number 6 is Dead Man's Island. Located in Vancouver, Dead Man's Island was a site of a lot of death, as you guys got from the title. It had been a native tree burial cemetery in the past, and when the first white settlers went there, they found hundreds of red cedar boxes attached to trees, and after one fell in open, they found a bunch of bones and a tassel of black hair, which were the remains of the Squamish people. When the settlers tried to acquire the island, they were warned by Chief Capilano of the fact the island is dead ground. A battle had taken place between 2 tribes, the North and South nations, over claims to the island. During the battle, 200 kids, women, and elders were captured by the South and held captive. In exchange for them, 200 northern warriors traded themselves in and were all killed on the spot. And if that's not enough death, in the late 1800s, the island was transformed into a quarantine site for victims of smallpox, and those who didn't survive are still buried there. The island was then the location of a logging dispute when Theodore Ludgate wanted to make it a lumber mill, and as soon as he tried to cut down a tree, he was arrested, but it was said they could hear shrieking and rattling bones when they tried to. Hence, no one has tried to cut down any trees since. Recent residents say they've heard footsteps in their house when no one else was on the island, and that they can see a glow coming from the trees that sometimes sharpens into a person. Coming in at number 5 is Okonoshima Island. 3 kilometers away from the coast of Japan, you can get to Okonoshima Island by ferry. And it's a nice island, honestly. There are walking trails for tourists, campsites, historical sites. It's not just an overgrown jungle. People refuse to live on the island for many reasons. For one, the island was used during the Russo-Japanese War, where it was chosen to start developing chemical weapons. Construction, development, and storage were all kept a secret, and residents and workers weren't even told what the plant was making, despite many of them suffering from toxic exposure-related sicknesses. The place used to produce over 6 kilotons of tear gas and mustard gas. The island was far enough from Tokyo that it didn't really pose a threat to it, but after the war was over, everything was burned or destroyed, and everyone was told to basically not say anything about it. But even now, nobody lives on the island, well, unless you count the fact that it's overrun with rabbits who aren't even native to that part of the world. Rabbit Island, as some call it, has so many rabbits because they all descended from the first ones let loose on the island when they tried to turn it into a park after the war. They also used the rabbits to test the chemical weapons on, but the ones on the island now are not related to the mutated ones. I don't know how they can even prove that, but sure. At number 4 is Ellis Island. Located in New York Harbor, the island used to be America's busiest immigrant inspection station for 60 years. 12 million immigrants passed through the island in that time, and 240,000 of them were rejected for health reasons. 3,000 of those either died in the hospital there or committed suicide. So the structures on the island are as follows. There's a massive main building that has a kitchen, storage space, dorms, a bakery, etc. Then there's the ferry building, and finally the main hospital building. Families were separated when kids would be accepted, but their sick parents would not, so the building has a very teary past. Over the years, nurses and technicians admitted they'd hear voices and smell burning candles coming from the Great Hall despite it being empty. The whispers of crying children can also be heard all over the building, even long after there were no kids there. I don't know why this whole separating kids and parents thing is reminding me a whole lot of what's going on in America right now, but that's none of my business. Filling our number 3 slot is Corregidor Island. Now this island is located near the entrance of Manila Bay in the Philippines, and because of its location, the island has always had coastal artillery on it to defend Manila from enemy warships. During World War II, the island played a major role in freeing the Philippines from Japanese forces. In 1942, Japanese forces took over the island, where they starved and tortured over 3,000 Filipinos and Americans. The island was ambushed again during the latter part of the war, and in 1945, the Americans wanted to recapture the island, which resulted in nearly 7,000 Japanese soldiers dying and 1,000 deaths on the American Filipino side. I honestly feel like a history teacher. Do you guys agree? When this happened, it's said that 3,000 Japanese soldiers chose suicide over being captured, so they sealed themselves in tunnels and caves and died in there. It was one of the biggest mass suicides that had ever taken place. And people say there's more blood that's flown on this island than water, and that's saying something. If that doesn't deter you from wanting to live here, honestly, nothing will. Now number 2 is Norfolk Island. Located between New Zealand and Australia, the island was first home to East Polynesians, but they were long gone when the British got to it in 1788. After that point, the island was a convict penal settlement. Since it was so remote, the British used it to house their most violent criminals, and many used to describe it as hell on earth. Why? Because since the early 1800s, the amount of rape, torture, and murder that's taken place on the island is endless because of the thousands and thousands of criminals that lived there. Forget the criminals, even the guards were vicious. The island is actually the 4th most haunted island in the world, and with everything that's happened there, are any of you really surprised? So if you want to move somewhere that's been dubbed hell on earth, be my guest, but I will not be joining you there. And finally, at number 1 is Pavilia Island. Located between Venice and Lido, the island's first record of existence was actually in 421 and was populated till 1379. By 1776, the island was used as a quarantine area for people suffering from the plague and other diseases, and this lasted more than a century. The area was then transformed into a mental hospital in 1922, where a doctor used to experiment on his patients with crude lobotomies. And if you've ever seen a lobotomy in a video or a movie, you know how screwed up they are. It's like the person just becomes a shell afterwards. Either way, after experimenting on his patients for years, he committed suicide by jumping from the hospital tower. Apparently, he'd gone mad from being haunted by so many ghosts, and I can definitely see why a bunch of patients would be angry with him after death and haunt him. The reasons are there. And I hate the thought of all derelict mental hospitals on a good day, but today particularly, I'm scared. The island is completely off limits to visitors and tourists, and I imagine the ghosts of all those dead people are very much still around. Starting us off at number 10 is Gaiola Island. As one of Naples' minor islands, Gaiola is actually super close to Italy's coast, to the point you can actually swim there in a few strokes. You just do some front crawl, how convenient. Anyway, by the turn of the 20th century, the island was considered cursed, and for good reason. Let's rewind. In the 1920s, the island belonged to Hans Braun, who was mysteriously found dead wrapped in a rug. No idea how he died, who wrapped him up, nothing. A little while later, his wife ended up drowning at sea, so far the score is Island 2, Human 0. Then we move on to the next owner, Otto Grunbach, who ended up having a heart attack while staying in the villa on the island. The next owner, Maurice Yves Santos, later committed suicide in a mental institute. What are we at now? 4-0? After her then came Carl Paul Langheim, who went bankrupt soon after the purchase. The next owner suffered many deaths in his family after he bought the island, and the next owner got it the worse. J. Paul Getty's youngest son died, his oldest son then committed suicide, and his grandson got kidnapped. Like, so many things went wrong for him. I feel so bad for him. Now, the last owner of the island ended up in jail, and the couple who owned the villa opposite the island were found murdered. I fully believe this island is cursed. It seems pretty damn evident. I don't need to buy that with the money I don't have.
In our ninth spot, we have Getter's Island. Situated in the Delaware River is an island known as Getter's Island. I mean, it's not the fanciest island out there, but if you want a little getaway, this place will do. Except there's just one teensy little flaw to it. It's haunted. So the island was actually named after Charles Getter, a man who was hung on the island after murdering his wife. But the hanging didn't quite go as planned. On the first attempt, the rope snapped and Getter fell to the floor. He was then waiting around for 20 minutes until they got a new rope. He died the next time around. Now it's said that his ghost haunts the island and is blamed for any tragedy that occurs on or near the island. In fact, 30 years later, a steamboat's boiler malfunctioned near the island's banks. It exploded and killed the 12 passengers on board. But if you can get past the island's haunted past, then feel free to scoop this place up.
At number 8 we have Corregidor Island. Now, this island is located near the entrance of Manila Bay in the Philippines, and I know what you're thinking, who wouldn't want to live on an island in the tropical east? Me. Well, due to its location, the island had always had coastal artillery on it to defend Manila from enemy warships. During World War II, the island played a huge role in freeing the Philippines from Japanese forces. In 1942, Japanese forces took over the island, where they starved and tortured over 3,000 Filipinos and Americans. The island was ambushed again at the end of the war, and by 1945 the Americans wanted to recapture the island. They were like, oh hell no. That recapture resulted in nearly 7,000 Japanese soldiers dying and 1,000 deaths on the American Filipino side. When this happened, it said that 3,000 Japanese soldiers chose suicide over being captured by the enemy, so they sealed themselves in tunnels and caves and waited to just die in there. It was one of the biggest mass suicides that had ever taken place, and just imagine there's been more blood flowing through the gutters of this island than water. That has to lower the market price of the island, surely. You know what I mean? Nope. No buying this.
Making our way down the list at number 7, we have the Island of Dolls, aka the island I never want to visit. And if you are creeped out by dolls just like me, I suggest you stay far away from this island as well. Located in Mexico City, the Island of Dolls is full of dolls hanging from trees and buildings. If that's not bad enough, these dolls have been there for so long that they are covered in dirt and cobwebs and insects. That just makes them look that much more terrifying. Oh, but it gets worse. Apparently the island is also haunted. The dolls were hung all over the island to try to scare the souls of the deceased that haunt the island. One man spent more than 50 years hanging all of these dolls up. Some of these dolls were dirty or missing limbs after being pulled out from the trash. But that didn't matter to him. Just makes it creepier for visitors. Now, this island is abandoned and looks something straight out of a horror movie. The only residents on the island now are the dolls and the ghosts.
Now at number 6 is Norfolk Island. Nestled between New Zealand and Australia, the island was first home to East Polynesians, but they were long gone when the British got to it in 1788. After that point, the island was a convict penal settlement. Since it was so remote, the British used it to house their most violent criminals, and many dubbed it as Hell on Earth. Why, you may be asking? Because since the early 1800s, the amount of rape, torture, and murder that's taken place on the island is endless because of the thousands and thousands of criminals that lived there. Forget the criminals, even the guards were vicious. The island is actually the 4th most haunted island in the world, and with everything that's happened there, are any of you really surprised? So if you want to buy an island that's been nicknamed Hell on Earth, be my guest, but I will not be visiting. No staycation for me.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Poveglia Island. With bright blue waters and a gondola ride away from Venice, who wouldn't want to own this island? Answer is, a lot of people. The island has a very, very dark past. During the Middle Ages, when the plague took the lives of thousands, this island was used as a dumping ground for the bodies. Then in the 1920s, this island had a mental institution, but the hospital workers were corrupt and often conducted experiments on the patients. Then over the years, the island has been bought and sold 3 times. The first 2 owners sold the island after witnessing some paranormal activity. It's said that the souls of the deceased haunt the island. In fact, to this day, this island is known as one of the most haunted places on Earth.
At number 4 is Daxa. So this abandoned southern Croatian island is only 0.07 kilometers squared large and has a Franciscan monastery built on top of it. It's cute enough, but one catastrophically tragic event occurred there that repelled even the most keen buyers. Back in 1944, 53 men who were accused of collaboration by the Yugoslav partisans were all executed on the island. A week prior, the partisans had entered the capital, Dubrovnik, and arrested 300 people. All 53 were killed without any trial whatsoever. 18 of the bodies had been identified via DNA, but the other 35 had not. Then in 2010, the remains were reinterred, and it was found out that Dubrovnik's mayor, Niko Koprivica, correct me if I'm wrong, Croatians, was among the victims of the massacre. I will not be buying any island that a massacre took place on of innocent people who deserved at least a trial, but I guess that's World War II for you. We have more criminals just fleeing to Argentina and just innocent Croatians just getting killed for no reason.
In our 3rd spot, we have Motu Matatahi. Being one of the many islands in French Polynesia, the Matu Matatahi looks like a tropical paradise. You have white sandy beaches, bright blue waters, tons of vegetation, and a slight radiation problem. Yeah, you heard me. From 1960 to 1996, France conducted 193 nuclear tests in the South Pacific. They claimed that the explosions were contained, but that was not the case. There is still radiation in that area. In fact, tons of residents throughout the area have developed thyroid cancers and leukemia. It's thought that this is due to radiation still being present. If that doesn't deter you, then maybe the cyclones, storms, landslides, and tsunamis that also threaten the area will.
Now at number 2 is Okunoshima Island. Located 3 kilometers away from the coast of Japan, you can get to Okunoshima Island by ferry. And it's a nice island, don't get me wrong, it's very gram-worthy for sure. There are walking trails for tourists, campsites, historical sites, and it's not just an overgrown jungle. Now there are many reasons why people refuse to live on the island. For one, the island was used during the Russo-Japanese War, where it was chosen as a place to start developing chemical weapons. Construction, development, and storage were all kept a secret, so residents and workers weren't even told what the plant was making, despite many of them suffering from toxic exposure related illnesses. Like, how do you not tell the locals who are directly negatively suffering from what you're doing? The place used to produce over 6 kilotons of tear gas and mustard gas, which is insanity, you guys. Thankfully, the island was far enough away from Tokyo that it didn't really pose a threat to those citizens, but that doesn't mean people didn't get hurt. Now, post-war, everything was burned or destroyed and everyone was told to not say anything about it. It was kind of like a sweep it under the rug situation. Nowadays, nobody lives on the island unless you count the fact that it's overrun with rabbits who aren't even native to that part of the world. Rabbit Island, as some people call it, has so many rabbits because they all descended from the first ones let loose on the island when they tried to turn it into a park after the war. They also use the rabbits to test the chemical weapons on, but the ones on the island now are not related to the mutated ones. I don't know how they figured that out, but they did.
And in our number 1 spot, we have Snake Island. About 25 miles off the coast of Brazil, there is an island no one dares to step foot on. I mean, it's a beautiful island, but it's infested with deadly snakes. In fact, this island is so dangerous that the Brazilian government has banned anyone from ever going there. This island is apparently home to around 4,000 snakes, most of them being golden lancehead vipers, aka one of the deadliest serpents in the world. It's said that this type of viper can grow up to be 18 inches long, and it's so poisonous that one bite can kill you within an hour. Legend goes that a fisherman arrived at this island in search of bananas, but was found days later in his boat, dead in a pool of his own blood. Then from 1909 to the 1920s, a family lived on the island to run the lighthouse. But according to another legend, the entire family was found dead after a group of snakes came into their home and attacked them. So yeah, any takers on this island? Starting off this countdown, we have McGibbon Island. McGibbon Island is a beautiful island located in New Brunswick, Canada. Shout out to Canada, didn't know we had it in us to have some creepy islands. Now, this is the perfect island if you love being outdoors. You can kayak and fish in its clear waters, and you can hike its tree-covered hills. And it only costs $30,000. I mean, that's a steal for your own private island. Except you got one big issue. Every spring, the entire island floods. So for a couple of months, the entire island gets engulfed in water and you can't really visit it. Meaning you can't really build anything on this island unless you don't mind it being destroyed by water. So maybe this isn't the best choice for an island. You certainly couldn't live on it, that's for sure, unless you want to drown alongside the island.
Oh hell no, I ain't trying to drown. Now coming in at number 9 are the Pitcairn Islands. Now this group of volcanic islands is the least populated jurisdiction in the world. The first inhabitants were the mutineers of the HMS Bounty, but now the population is like 50 people or less. It's gotten so bad that the government is actually begging people to live there. They're willing to give settlers a free plot of land to build on, but even with that insane offer, no one's up for it. And I feel like that may be due to the sexual abuse case of 2004, where a third of the male population on the island were convicted of pedophilia and sexual abuse. Yeah, I wouldn't want to buy or live on an island where such a large part of the population are just people that could hurt me. Now, there are also no jobs on the island. There's like one general store where you have to order your food supply 3 months in advance, so that's not really that appealing, is it? But at least it has electricity and internet. Oh, who am I kidding? No one's gonna buy it anyway.
Making our way down the list, number 8, we have Partridge Island. This island, located in St. John, New Brunswick, has a very sinister history. And apparently, New Brunswick has a lot of scary islands. Legend has it that between 1785 to 1850, thousands of residents died there from typhus and cholera. There were so many dead bodies that the soil had a hard time disintegrating them all. Some believe that if you go on this island, chances are you will stumble across someone's remains. But not only that, this island is said to be haunted by tons of different ghosts. It's haunted by a soldier that committed suicide there, and by people who got trapped and died in one of the tunnels there. Not only that, but it's said to never go to the island after dark. And if you're on the island when night falls, well, you're pretty much dead. The island is extremely dangerous at nighttime. Tons of people have broken bones trying to make their way across it at night. Others have drowned or fallen to their death. Also, at night, people have heard screams and cries for help coming from the island. But when the Coast Guards investigate, they find no one. So they believe that these are the sounds of the ghosts that haunt the island.
Filling at number 7 slot is the Isle of Wight. This is the biggest and second most populous island in England and is also known as Britain's most haunted island. Already gonna do very well in the property market, I can just see it now. Not. Now, it used to house a lot of fortification back in the war days, and it was a bit of a holiday retreat for Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. The Stone Age community left an ancient tomb near Freshwater Bay on the island, which means there are hella spirits there. TB patients were also shipped off there and just left for dead, and the ghosts of all these people have been known to haunt the island, groaning and floating through the town. Places like Knighton Gorgeous Manor and God's Providence House are known to be supernatural hotspots. The manor has a really dark history with it as well, with a serial killer resident living there like Hugh de Morville and his 3 accomplices. Later on in the 1800s, the owner of the manor, George Maurice, burned it down just to spite his daughter. Petty much? The criminals have been seen riding horses on the anniversary of their deaths, and the manor seems to house animal-like apparitions that look like gargoyles but aren't. I don't want to find out what they do look like. No.
Coming in at number 6, we have Ramrey Island. Located in Myanmar, this island is considered one of the most dangerous islands in the world. So during World War II, this island was the site for many battles. In 1945, the British soldiers drove the Japanese fighters off of the main area of the island, forcing them to flee into the marshy area surrounding the island. One problem: those marshes were filled with hungry crocodiles. As a result, 500 soldiers were killed by these crocodiles. In fact, this incident is featured in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most number of fatalities in a crocodile attack, and it's the greatest disaster suffered by humans from an animal. Now it's said that the ghosts of those who died haunt the island. So if you don't mind some ghosts and crocodiles, feel free to scoop up this island.
Now at number 5 is Hart Island, also known as the Island of the Dead, so we're off to a great start here clearly. Located in New York, this island has been through it. It used to be the location of a psychiatric institution, a prison war camp, a boys reformatory school, a tuberculosis sanatorium, a rehab center, a jail, and a potter's field. Was there anything happy or even remotely positive on that list? I don't think so. Now, more than 1 million people are buried on the island, many of whom weren't claimed by their families or were just homeless. Access to the island is restricted unless you're a family member of someone who's buried there, and even then you have to request access before actually going. From the name, you can probably guess that many people believe the island is haunted, and with that many people buried there, it'd be almost impossible if it wasn't. No one has the option to live there, but I don't think anyone would, even if they did, let alone buy it. Too many dead people. Just creepy.
In our 4th spot, we have Tillamook Island, otherwise known as the Terrible Tilly. This is the smallest island on this list. It's less than an acre in size. All that they have room for on this island is a single lighthouse. Now, there's a reason why they call the island Terrible Tilly. The island is often terrorized by waves that could wipe you out in an instant. This made the construction of the lighthouse very hard. In fact, it took 500 days to complete. Then in 1881, a ship crashed on shore, killing all the members on board, except for the crew's dog. Thank gosh the puppy was safe, that's all I care about. Furthermore, the island is notorious for being cursed or haunted by evil spirits. 4 men ended up running the lighthouse on the island, but living in isolation without their families drove them insane. On one night shift, all 4 men saw a ghost ship approach the island. Other lightkeepers have been attacked by ghosts and have heard sounds of creepy moaning. In fact, one lighthouse keeper had to be taken away in a straitjacket after being driven mad by the ghosts.
At number 3 is Hashima Island. Located in Nagasaki, Hashima was once one of the most populated parts of Japan, but now lies completely deserted. The island was known for housing many undersea coal mines where conscripted Koreans and Chinese prisoners were forced to work in horrible conditions. Now the temperature down in the mines would be 30 degrees Celsius every day, which actually really isn't that bad, but the humidity was at 95%, which is deathly. Around 1,300 workers died due to malnutrition, exhaustion, and other miscellaneous accidents, or whatever shady things that means. Other sources say the death toll was actually above 2,000, but we won't know for sure. What's even more eerily creepy about the island is that the building ruins are all untouched. Everything's undisturbed by nature. And I feel like when places are abandoned like that, the creepiest people are always just lurking in the shadows who are sort of just forgotten there or just chose to stay.
In our second spot, we have Palmyra Atoll Island. Palmyra Atoll Island is a beautiful island with white beaches and bright blue waters located near the Hawaiian Islands. But it's a place that no one ever wants to visit. Why? Well, it's said to have a very dark history of countless murders. So back in 1870, a crew aboard a ship called the Angel were shipwrecked near the island. The survivors who made it to shore were later found brutally murdered. Their bodies were found scattered throughout the island. No one knows what on earth happened to them. But that's not the only strange thing that happened there. A plane was flying above the island when all of a sudden it just dropped out of the sky. Rescue teams were never able to find the plane. Then this happened again with a different plane that was flying over the island. All of a sudden, it just disappeared off the radar and vanished without a trace. You thought I was done? No, there's more. In 1974, Eleanor Graham and her husband Malcolm Graham decided to go visit the island. Once they made it there, they were never heard from again. That was until several years later when Eleanor's skeletal remains were found in a large container wrapped in barbed wire. She had been beaten to death, her body was burned and dismembered. Malcolm's body was never found, and no one knows what happened to them. Something or someone on this island is responsible for these murders. We just don't know what it is, or I don't know, it's pretty scary. I don't think it's an animal, because how will an animal like wrap it up and yeah.
And finally, at number 1 is Dead Man's Island. Located in Vancouver, Dead Man's Island has a history of a lot of death, as you guys probably guessed from the name. Prior to white settlers coming, the island had been a native tree burial cemetery, and when the settlers got there, they found hundreds of red cedar boxes attached to the trees. Now one fell down, and inside they found a bunch of bones and a tassel of black hair, which later turned out to be the remains of the Squamish people. When the settlers tried to acquire the island, they were warned by Chief Capilano that the island is dead ground. A battle had taken place between 2 tribes, the North and South nations, over claims to the island. During the battle, 200 kids, women, and elders were captured by the South and held captive. In exchange for them, 200 Northern warriors traded themselves in and were all killed on the spot. And if that's not enough death, in the late 1800s, the island was transformed into a quarantine site for victims of smallpox, and those who didn't survive were also buried there. The island was then the location of a logging dispute when Theodore Ludgate wanted to make it a lumber mill. As soon as he tried to cut down a tree, he was arrested, but it was said they could hear shrieking and rattling bones when they tried. Hence, no one has tried to cut down any trees since. Recent residents say they've heard footsteps in their houses when no one else was on the island, and that they can see a glow coming from the trees that sometimes sharpens into a shape of a human. To be fair, I feel like this island is protecting itself from being bought, and I like that energy. You stay on Bible.